Hello, this is Jordan. This will be my project for Latino culture class. This will be just talking about four main topics that I've chosen and how it will relate, how it relates to my identity and me, and also kind of just like my commentary on it. So without further ado, let's get into it. First subject is the subject of identity. The subject of identity of Latino or Hispanic, Americans. Um, on an offside note, I wanted to write a script, but then I realized I didn't want to write a script because I didn't want to read off of it, and it sounded like extremely robotic. That's just very unnatural for me. It's just very jarring. So yeah. All right. So on the text of Louis Aldamo's hyphen. Uh, it's the idea of the hyphen is something that you create. It's something that is possibly always changing, and there's no real definition. To give an example, Luis Aldama calls himself Irish Mexican American, which is pretty interesting. And the other term that is synonymous in the U.S. is Chicanat. Don't know how to pronounce it, unfortunately. Chicanex by Marie Contreras. Um, the text says that a Chicano is meaning a Mexican American that knows their history. Now, this should be apparently different from a sole Mexican American is someone who is of Mexican descent born in the U.S. Now, to greatly oversimplify the text, it's kind of confusing me personally because Chicano can basically mean someone who is Mexican descent does not necessarily know how to actually speak Spanish, but knows their history. But it should be noted that that term itself is kind of pretty vague. So just keep that in mind. So as I mentioned, Chicano isn't Mexican. Are they even the same? As mentioned before, they're kind of not the same apparently because Chicano is more of an American thing. This is because Chicano was invented, a term coined in the 1960s and 70s during the civil rights movement, during obviously an unfortunate time where, not only black people, but, other, people of color were highly discriminated against. So originally Chicano was actually a derogatory term that is now used as a positive term. Uh, but even then, the definition itself feels kind of vague. And our next thing, the other thing is, the hyphen, right? The hyphen is something that I create. Um, there is really no set definition on what a, a Latino Hispanic American wants to identify themselves as. It is something that they create. So the question brings up, what am I? If we're talking about hyphen wise, what am I? Now, I am half Guatemalan, I am half Mexican, I live in the US, but apparently a lot of people, when they talk about themselves, they don't really use the term American. To give an example, some people, if they're like me, they might call themselves Guatemalan or Mexican Guatemalan American, while some other people do not like to use American in it. There could be many reasons why, but one of the main reasons that I see is because they don't because in context of being in America, it feels kind of unnecessary of mentioning the American aspect when everyone is going to be American. Um, it also has to do with the kind of an idea of where they still want to maintain their mostly Hispanic or Latino roots, and they kind of see it as maybe possibly as imperialistic. Again, there's a ton of other reasons. It always really depends on what you ask someone. But what I say is I'd always say I'm Mexican, Guatemalan. I never include American because where I live, I'm already living in the U.S., so it feels unnecessary. Um, but you're probably asking, what if I'm talking to someone that's not in the US? If it's not in the US. Now, that gets pretty interesting because I will still say that I'm Mexican Guatemalan. Now, the experiences I've had online are very interesting because then people tend to get really confused because they're like, oh, okay, Mexican Guatemalan. Does that actually mean, um, you know, Jordan is Mexican, but he lives in Guatemala? Is he a Guatemalan, but he lives in Mexico? And but obviously, it always me has to explain that, oh, I live in the U.S., but I solely identify as Mexican, Guatemalan, and yeah. So on the next subject, it's actually a little bit related to it. It is the subject of race and ethnicity. We have these two maps right here, uh, but different ethnic groups possibly. But in the next slides, I will explain why this is not maybe not even correct. Now, in the text of A Race of Silvio Torres Salient and Nancy Kang, and then Urasa by B.V. Alguguen. Oh my goodness, excuse me. It's almost kind of the same as the hyphen. It feels confusing, but there is kind of more of a set definition. There is more of like concrete, like information, kind of concrete proof. There are many. Well, it is more factual. There is more, ways to prove it. However, there are a lot of labels. Just like the hyphen, it is sort of changing, but it also kind of not. And but it always brings a question, what is classified as being more of one ethnicity than the other? It's definitely very confusing, making me feel like this Ash baby right here. Very overwhelming. And right here we had this group, these different ethnic groups. So we have indigenous, mestizo, pardos, Zambo, African, mulatto, European. Now, hopefully it shouldn't be too confusing. But for example, you might have possibly heard of the common term mestizo. This is obviously someone who is half European, half indigenous. Uh, in many cases, a lot of people like to say that mestizos are like the pure Hispanic or Latino, but again, this is kind of misleading. While they are at times the most dominant group, this doesn't mean that the other groups are invalid or don't exist. For example, we have Zambo, which is half indigenous, half African. Uh, Mulatto, which is half European, half African. Pardo is most interesting. Um, that is mostly used in Brazil, but in some contexts it's also used in other countries. It is a triracial, so it combines indigenous, European, and African. There are these other terms right here. There's quadrone, which is one quadrone. I think it's a quadrone, 1/4 African or indigenous, and then 3/4 European. There is Catizo, which is one Mestizo and then one Spanish parent, and then there's Chino, which could be someone or used as someone of Asian descent. But this term is weird because it's not always exact. It could just mean someone who is purely Asian, who is completely Asian but lives, uh, you know, in a Latin American, right? So what does that make me, right? So we have all these groups, right? None, but identity-wise, just makes it very, very confusing. So what does that make me? So, if I'm Mexican Guatemalan, I don't know why the Guatemalan flag came out so low quality. I tried fixing that, but I don't know. So you would say it would be mestizo, right? So that seems pretty obvious, right? Maybe that's what I pretty am. No, no, possibly. Not quite, not exact. This may sound pretty crazy, but I actually have French and Chinese ancestry. I just include the Qing Dynasty flag here because I can actually trace when my great grandfather came to Guatemala. On my dad's side. So the French and Chinese part comes from my Guatemalan side. Now, in this chart right here, also these words on my Mexican side. From what I know, everyone is mestizo from my great grandparents all the way down to my mom. However, the Guatemalan side, it's quite crazy. See, so I have a French great grandma and a Chinese great grandpa, and this would make my French Chinese grandma, who is still alive. So as you can see, she is actually not even mestizo or even Hispanic at all. Meanwhile, my grandpa, unfortunately, he's passed away, but he did come from mestizo great grandparents, and in turn, this would create my father, who is French, Chinese, and mestizo. I don't know what the percentage would that be. I'm not even gonna try to do the math here, so it gets pretty insane. So now we have my Mestizo mother on my Mexican side, and then my Chinese French Mestizo father. So in turn, this would create a Chinese or Chino French Blanco, because Blanco means white, white, European. Mestizo son. That is me. So that is my pure ancestry. And I put Mestizo twice because, my father is of Mestizo ancestry as well as my mother. But I don't know. I'm just gonna mention that. I'm not even gonna try to do the math on this. Going back to this other chart and then looking at my parents. Again, I am not even going to attempt to do that math, right? So what does that identify me? Now, do I ever oh, sorry, press through. Do I ever go out and say that I am Chinese, French, or Mestizo, or Chinese, French, Mexican, Guatemalan? Honestly, no. Um, it's already, I feel like in some context already enough to already say that I'm half Mexican, half Guatemalan. Um, to say that I'm part of like four ancestries is already pretty insane. Um, I only mention my Chinese and French ancestry sometimes, or if the idea of like further ancestry is mentioned. But it's kind of crazy how my me it proves that the race and ethnicity is there's not always a concrete definition. It's always changing. There's so many ancestries that people have, you know, and there is no. I guess you could say there is no pure Hispanic. There's no pure Mestizo. Again, it always depends on the person, but it's always definitely very interesting in how that works. And the final two topics I'm actually going to basically combine into one is Spanglish and cultural assimilation for our final two topics right here. Now, what is Spanglish? And the official classification is debated to this very day. It is code switching or a blend of Spanish and English. It is primarily used by Spanish speaking Americans. I didn't add this, but to mention this, at times it is mainly used by the younger generation. From my experience, from what I witnessed, it tends to be used mainly by Gen Z or like millennials. Um, but because the classification is still debated, it could be described or classified as a Pidgin Croel or hybrid language. Again, it is still debated. There is no singular definition at all. So what are some examples? Now we have this image right here. So it says Mecánica General or general mechanic. Checo means I guess like check free, like free check, or like free like kind of like a quote, like a free like quote. um so kind of it combines English and Spanish. So we have another example. Yo fui a la store para buy las uvas. It basically means I went to the store to buy the grapes or buy some grapes. This is one example. There are other types right here. Estoy happy means I am happy. Um, Spanglish can be used as a way where it literally mixes English and Spanish words into a sentence, or these other ones like hoy yo voy to school, which means today I will go to school. um, or tengo que find the entrance, or I need to find the entrance. These three bottom examples are different types where Spanglish can be used, where one you begin a sentence or phrase with either English or Spanish, but then down the line you switch to the other language. Um, from what I see, these three bottom examples are mainly used more. However, the mixing version is also used, so it is pretty interesting. However, let's move on to assimilation. We'll come back to Spanglish here. On cultural assimilation, cultural assimilation in the U.S. on the text assimilation by Catherine S. Ramirez through pages 14 to 18. To greatly oversimplify, uh, simulation in the context of America is where Latinos have to be part of the American dream. It is necessary to assimilate in America, to adapt American customs, but it's mainly white customs, and speak English. These American customs are like the liberty of freedom, pursuit of happiness, it's an individuality, but there are some definitely problems to it. It's kind of, to have different ethnic groups, not just Latinos or Hispanics or other ethnic groups, so that we can be united under one goal. However, there are some problems. This unfortunately creates the division where it leads to racism and discrimination, because America is mainly led by, white Americans. Um, it tends to create racism discrimination where, um, it encourages those to lose their previous identity and culture into more adapting a white culture and identity. Um, loses the, oh, I had a typo there. Oh well, loses the ability to speak Spanish and also other languages, either meaning indigenous languages in the context of um, Latino or Hispanic, regions. And unfortunately, this assimilation gets passed over to the next generation, meaning that they lose their ability to speak their languages and lose their culture. They basically become whitewashed, as that term um, goes. Now, Spanglish relates to assimilation. Well, it is pretty interesting because Spanglish is almost a semi-assimilation, but not fully. This is because Spanglish still, in this, again, language, this blended language still uses English, in its tongue, in this so-called dialect. It still maintains the language. It still maintains the Spanish language, but at the same time, it almost creates a sort of new identity. It creates this new identity of Latino Americans and how they communicate and interact with each other. In fact, this can actually be used positively because it can further encourage heritage. So this could cause, you know, Latino Hispanic Americans to discover their roots, to discover their possibly lost culture and heritage. And it kind of plays on the American dream, because the American dream is about individuality and, independence. The reason why it plays on that, because in a way, since it creates that sort of new identity, it kind of plays on the American dream about, being who you are. Creating a new identity, because it's pretty interesting where it creates, Latino Hispanic American, where it's not necessarily um, fully, Hispanic or Latino, but it's also not fully American, just by that language by itself, because it is used by the younger and, the younger generation. Now, but however, does this even relate to me? Well, as this cat looks like, it sort of does. It's just, it sort of does. Now, I normally do not use Spanglish, but there are many times that I do. I use it a lot to communicate people my age. Especially, in this class, in my Latino culture class, I've actually talked to many of my classmates, and we, speak in Spanglish. It is definitely very, very fascinating, especially when I myself don't actually use it a lot. I know how to speak Spanish. I speak Spanish and English. I do use it to teach about it to older family members. They did not grow in an environment where Spanglish was a thing. Obviously they only either use, Spanish or some sort of other indigenous language to communicate. Uh, and I definitely like the idea. I like the idea because it's kind of, like youth empowered. It's very empowering. It uses to create an identity where, um, where in a nation that is mainly predominantly white, and also back then, since it was more less open, more discriminatory. It's kind of an identity where it creates unity, it creates some sort of unity, like protection, like a symbolism of unity for the children of Hispanic and Latino immigrants, like myself. So that is definitely how it's way that is used. And now, in conclusion, the Latino American identity or Hispanic American identity is something that is always changing in a changing nation. You know, it is something that will continue to be studied. It is something that will um, forever, shapeshift. It is something that, you know there is no pure definition. Or like there's a lot of like nuance and complexity towards it, and it's something that is very interesting and to be studied about. So, if you are interested in learning about it, you should definitely, you know, go into it, and then that will also bring the conclusion to this video right here. So thank you so much for watching, and yeah, so thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you later. Bye bye.